they're the point people for all 1,700 schools, which is insane, but this is where we are. So we just want to give you an overview of what it is that we do. So our main responsibilities include providing district-wide trainings on implementation of LGBTQ inclusion practices and best practices. Because we are a team of two, we do professional development for district offices or district-wide training. For example, a district office will reach out to us and say, I would like you to train all the principals in District 2, and then we will do that. All the school social workers in District 2. So that's what we do. And when it comes to school by school, it like on the ground support, we rely on our community partners, which I'll get into in just a moment. So we provide these trainings to district leadership and district-wide trainings. We provide case support for bullying and harassment cases. When districts need additional feedback or thought partnerships on how to handle a certain situation, they will contact Jude and myself. We connect schools with LGBTQ community support resources and programming. We have a very wide network of community organizations that help us do this work. And we plan citywide events like the citywide GSA Summit. We plan Pride marches during June. We're in almost every borough's Pride March, so look out for us if you're a spectator. And we also support identity-based clubs with centralized funding, DOE regulations, and bullying and building resources and best practices to maintain club engagement. So the majority of the clubs that we support are gender and sexuality alliances, or respect for all clubs, or diversity clubs, any club that touches on LGBTQ inclusion, right? We give them that support by helping them navigate funding and best practices. And lastly, we coordinate the Yankee Stonewall Scholarship, which is an annual initiative with the New York Yankees, the Stonewall Inn, and New York City Public Schools, where they provide $10,000 for 5 students, so one student per borough, to go to college, a 2 or 4 year college. We're in the process of collecting applications, so if you would like more information on that, on one of your someone you know, or a young teen who is on their way to college, please let us know. We're happy to share that information with you.
Awesome. So Kalima was talking about our community partners and the fact that we rely on them to do a lot of this work in schools, and we use them as a resource constantly in this work. So we kind of wanted to start by actually pointing out our community partners and our community resources that we work with consistently. So we're lucky in New York to have an LGBTQ center in every borough. So probably the most well-known is the LGBT Community Center, which is in the West Village in Manhattan. We also work with Queens Community House, which is located in Forest Hills, Queens, and the LGBT Network, which is located in Queens and Astoria. We work with Brooklyn Community Pride Center as well, and they have 2 locations now, one in Bed-Stuy, one in Crown Heights. Destination Tomorrow we work with in the South Bronx, and then Pride Center of Staten Island, which is out in Staten Island. So we want you all to know, there are resources out there. We rely heavily on our community partners. And again, we're lucky in New York City to be able to have close proximity to all of these amazing spaces that have youth programs. So we have more community partners we wanted to highlight, and resources as well. So Trans Lifeline is a hotline for trans youth to speak with a trans adult. So it has that kind of Trevor Project chat component and crisis hotline, but it's specifically for trans youth. So it has a mentorship element as well, because they get to speak with a trans adult. The Trevor Project, people may have heard of, they provide 24/7 crisis support services to LGBTQ young people. And we're going to be highlighting some of their stats tonight. The LGBT Network we spoke of, Ackerman Institute's Gender and Family Projects, they have really amazing support meetings and programs for families with trans young people. So they do counseling support that's family-based. Our friends at PFLAG NYC, we work with them very closely. They have their Safe Schools program, which goes in schools for workshops and trainings for both students and staff. And then they also have support meetings for families. It's really an allyship organization, so they have support meetings for all identities, AAPI meetings, Black Family Circles. So if you're looking for family support, PFLAG really is the ally org that we work with. History on a Race, they create inclusive curriculum and professional development. That's more for DOE staff. And then Live Out Loud, they have support resources for parents educators and students, and they're really our Gender and Sexuality Alliance or GSA go-to. They go into schools and they make sure that our clubs are being supported and yeah, uplifted. So we wanted to highlight that to start out with, and I'll pass it back to Kalima.
Thank you. So I am policy enthusiast as a just a person, right? And so I'm really, really fortunate to work in a school system that has affirming policies that protect our LGBTQ young people and educate school communities. So I just wanted to get into a little bit of the impact of affirming policies, right? At the very baseline, it increases student attendance because when students feel safer at school, they come to school more often, right? It decreases bullying, harassment, and other disciplinary behaviors when students are required to show respect for all. It fosters a sense of belonging for students and staff. It decreases depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideations. And overall, it fosters a safe, inclusive school culture. And so we'll go into a little bit more about what that can look like and what our goal is, all schools should look like. Not only do we have affirming policies just in our school system in New York City, New York State Education Department has affirming policies as well that we are required to follow as educators within the state of New York, right? So the Dignity for All Students Act is one of them, if you're not familiar with it, DASA for short. It basically seeks to provide the state's public elementary and secondary school students with a safe and supportive environment free from discrimination, intimidation, taunting, harassment, and bullying on school property or a school bus or at a school function, right? And if you're able to distribute these slides to the attendees, Jessica, there's links to these policies here in case you want to read further, just so you're aware of what your rights are and what your students' rights are. Next slide, Jude. And then a little bit further into DASA, like what does it actually say? It talks about a lot of specific aspects, but one of the things I want to highlight is when it talks about inclusive curriculum. It specifically talks about instruction in certain subjects, and it says for all public school students, instruction that supports development of a school environment free of harassment, bullying, or discrimination as required by DASA, with an emphasis on discouraging acts of harassment, bullying, discrimination, et cetera, et cetera. And it says limited, but not limited to instruction that raises students' awareness and sensitivity to harassment, bullying, discrimination based on a person's actual or perceived protected class, including their race, color, weight, national origin, ethnic group, religion, religious practice, sexual orientation, and gender identity. So the state is basically saying that schools, public schools who are receiving federal financial assistance, right, are required to educate students on how to combat bias and harassment of marginalized communities and protected classes, right? So this is definitely within the range of LGBTQ inclusive curriculum because that plays right into that goal, right? And our Respect for All initiative that we have within New York City public schools. So when people are saying, when sometimes we get reached out to by families saying, I want to opt my child out of LGBTQ inclusive curriculum, we cannot legally do that. We cannot accommodate that request because we are a public school within the state of New York, right? And our inclusive curriculum is not preaching that people's personal belief systems are wrong or whatever the case. It's just that when you come to school, regardless of how you identify or how others identify, everyone deserves to be treated with the same respect, right? And this is what it looks like to combat bias of these marginalized communities. So I just want to make sure that everyone knows that it's not school by school that policy exists. It is within the state of New York. Also within the state of New York, we have guidance on affirming transgender students, right? A lot of DOE staff members aren't even aware that the state provides this guidance. And a lot of the guidelines that we have within the New York City public school system policy, the language is taken directly from the state in the state document, right? It's very specific. It says things like, quote, a student who says she is a girl and wishes to be regarded that way throughout the school day should be respected and treated like any other girl. So too, with a boy who says he is a boy and wishes to be treated that way throughout the school day. Such students should be respected and treated like any other boy, right? Very clear, not a lot of room for misinterpretation, right? It even acknowledges that many transgender people experience discrimination and some experience violence due to their status. Some environments may feel safe and inclusive, and others less so, challenging a person's ability to live consistently with one gender identity in all aspects of life, right? So essentially, this is part of our training that we share with school staff and district staff, right? That the state has this guidance, right? And this is where we get the language within New York City. So a lot of times parents will ask, well, where is this written? So we have a convenient link so that you can see where it is written and read into more detail. But we are protected by the state when it comes to affirming policies. Jude, you want to take
Yeah,
over?
so inclusive curriculum, um, like Kalima was saying, we get a lot of inquiry about opt-out, about, opting out of inclusive curriculum. And we think that a big part of this is people don't really understand what we're talking about when we're talking about LGBTQ inclusive curriculum. So I want to first start with what it is not, and this is based off of real emails that we've gotten. So it is not preaching to students that their family's personal belief systems are wrong. It is not grooming students with made up gender ideologies. It's not focused on sex or sexual activity. It's not an effort to sway students to be LGBTQ. And also, inclusive curriculum is not something that's impossible to do. So then moving over to what it is, it's diverse perspectives and human experiences in course content. It's engagement with difficult topics such as power, privilege, access, inequity in a constructive way. It's also, we believe, an opportunity for teachers to reflect and reframe on their own implicit biases that they may carry into the school building, and positive representation of LGBTQ people, history, and events. So students should see themselves in the course content in ways that are empowering. And a statistic from the Office of School Wellness Program is that 19.4% of LGBTQ students were taught positive representation of LGBT people, history, or events in their schools, and 17% had been taught negative content. So pretty low percentage for that first one, and pretty high actually for that second, that people were being taught negative content. So it's embedded in the course content. We're going to give a couple of examples of just what that looks like.
Oh, can you double back for just 1 second? Um, to the other slide, Jude. The last thing that I just wanted to highlight, the last thing that Jude said about how students should see themselves represented in course content in empowering ways. This is not just for LGBTQ students, this is all students, right? I like to share the anecdote that when I was in middle school, I went to a dominantly white school, and the only time I learned about Black history was during February, and which is the shortest month of the year, just pointing that out. And and it was basically highlighting just the struggle, right? So Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, right? Things like that. All the things that we hear about often, I was learning about, but I wasn't hearing empowering stories. I wasn't learning about Stacey Abrams and Ayanna Presley and all the people that I want to be, right? So it was really hard for me to envision myself as a strong, Black, powerful adult because I wasn't learning about strong, Black, powerful women in my course content, right? So it's really really vital for students to be able to see their identity represented in the course content in empowering ways so that they know that that their life can look like that too. They can be successful as well.
Yeah, thank you, Kalima. That's a really good point for people to be able to see their future. So that's why inclusive curriculum is so important. I'm going to give just two brief examples of what this looks like. So here is a middle school, high school English literature lesson about the Harlem Renaissance with a focus on intersectionality. County Cullen was a poet, children's writer, novelist, and a leader of the Harlem Renaissance. Cullen was openly gay. Alan Locke, Dean of the Harlem Renaissance, guided Cullen towards queer positive material that encouraged him to embrace his identity. In a letter, Cullen wrote, "It opened up for me soul windows which had been closed. It threw a noble and evident light on what I had begun to believe because of what the world believes, ignoble and unnatural." So we're talking about many aspects of who County Cullen was. One of the pieces of who he was that he was an openly gay man. What inclusive curriculum means is that we're not excluding that piece of his identity. We are going to include that embedded in this course content about the Harlem Renaissance and County Cullen. So when people say, a whole lesson focus or, we're focusing on sex, we're not. This is really what we mean. And this is part of the Respect for All initiative, right? With New York City Public Schools, we respect all people. We are including people's identities in this course content. And we get a lot of questions about age restriction on this. So, people will say, okay, maybe I understand middle school, high school, but what's the age minimum restriction? We don't. So there's no minimum age restriction for LGBTQ inclusion in DOE schools, meaning that we have LGBTQ inclusive curriculum in K-5 lessons as well. Here's a pre-K kindergarten lesson on family. This is from the Family Book by Todd Parr. Some families are big, some families are small. Some families live near each other, and some families live far away from each other. Some families have two moms and two dads, and some families have one parent instead of two. So we're including LGBTQ inclusive curriculum right here in this book. We're talking about family structure, because something that comes up a lot is with younger grades, is that, people have various family structures. We live in a big city. Some people have two moms, two dads. Some families have one mom, one dad. We want to make sure that we're including everyone in this, because we've had cases of people being harassed for having same gender parents. So we know it's important that in DOE schools we have this representation in our curriculum.
Thank you, Jude. And also when we're talking about policy, we have a very long list of chancellor's regulations within New York City public schools. The regulations that we focus on heavily are A830 and A832, which talk about bullying, harassment, and specifically how to categorize them, right? So it says harassment and bullying are the creation of a hostile school environment for another student by conduct, threats, intimidation, abuse, including cyberbullying. But then it says, but when the bullying behavior directed at the target is based on a protected class, actual or perceived, that behavior is then defined as harassment. So, like I said, race, color, creed, immigration status. So, if a student is being targeted by another student and bullying them because of their undocumented immigration status, that is no longer just bullying, teasing, whatever. They're being harassed, right? And there's a specific protocol for dealing with harassment cases among students. So it's really important whenever I get a call from a staff member and they say, "Oh, I have a student that's being teased, because they're trans, or the students are, are picking on them and they're not using their correct pronouns on purpose." And I'm like, no, they're not being teased. They're not being picked on. They are being harassed. And what steps have you taken within the school to correct these actions, right? Or to, to give attention to this problem, right? So it's really important to categorize things correctly, because if you use minimizing language, the way you deal with it is going to be minimized as well. And I also want to highlight another great policy that we have within the DOE or NYC Public Schools, whichever is your favorite flavor. Guidelines to support transgender and gender expansive students. It's very comprehensive. It covers names and pronouns, sports and physical education, bathroom access, locker room access, and things like that. I'll just highlight a couple of the policies. This is not the entire extensive policy. It's easily accessible on the DOE website. If you just go to the search bar and type in transgender, it's the first one that pops up. But I just want to highlight some frequently asked question points. So about names and pronouns, every student is entitled to be addressed by the name and pronoun that corresponds to the student's gender identity, or the name and pronoun that they asked to be called, right? Students are entitled to be called the name that they want to be called. Schools should create opportunities to confirm the correct information with all their students in a manner that respects students' privacy, right? Um, if a parent would like to change their child's permanent records to match their chosen name, right? Maybe as a parent, you're not ready to change their name legally, but you would like them to feel affirmed and see their chosen name on the report card, for example. That's a case that happens a lot. The parent will submit the name and gender change request form to the school secretary, who will go into the school database, the student database, and make the student's chosen name the primary name that's generated onto those permanent record documents. This does require parental consent, right? These are family-facing documents that are going to be updated, so parental consent is required to update permanent records. Yes, we still keep the legal name in our system. We don't erase that. The legal name is still there, but it just makes it so the chosen name is the primary name that comes up on attendance rosters and things like that. But there's no documentation required to update or to use a chosen name on non-permanent record, like a homework assignment or a test paper. No form is required for that. And if it comes when it comes to IEPs count as permanent records. So parental consent would be required to have a chosen name or a non-legal name used on an IEP. So with sports and gym classes, right, students must be permitted to participate in phys ed, competitive athletics, in accordance with the student's gender identity asserted at school. Students must be permitted to participate in all school activities in accordance with their gender identity asserted at school, right? Partner activities shouldn't be separated by gender. We're getting rid of that. That's dated, right? So let's, as an example, is if in gym class they have a dance segment and they're doing ballroom dance. I don't know. Maybe they're learning ballroom dance in gym class. The teacher cannot say boys pair with girls. It's okay, partner up. Who's going to be the leader and who's going to be the follower? That's how we're doing these things because there are so many non-binary and gender non-conforming students. And the moment we say boys and girls, that student who might not even be out feels like they're excluded. They feel like they don't count, their identity is not valid. And so we are very much aware that we don't want students to feel that way, especially in middle and high school when they're hyper aware and hypersensitive to these little cues, these societal cues, right? So we want them to know that they are included and their identity is valid. So we're not going to be separating lines by gender anymore. That shouldn't be happening. If it is happening in your school community, please let your administration know that's not within policy, right? Um, Facilities, when it comes to bathrooms, students, trans and gender nonconforming students must be provided access to restrooms, locker rooms, consistent with their gender identity asserted at school. And schools must provide reasonable alternative arrangements for any student who expresses the need or desire for increased privacy. This could be using the gender neutral student bathroom in the school. Every school building should have at least one that is specifically for student use, not for adults, but just for students. It could be a use of a separate changing schedule for gym class if they don't feel comfortable changing in the locker room with the other students, right? But these are never forced on students as their only option, but it is something they have the option to use if that's what they need for themselves, right? We can never say that you are a transgender student, you have to use the nurse's bathroom, or you have, you know what I mean? We're not doing that. We're not othering students. It's about how they feel and how they feel affirmed in their identity. And it has to be consistently asserted at school. So it's not just like Timmy shows up to school one day randomly and says, I'm a girl, I'm going to use the girls' bathroom. It has to be consistently asserted at school, day to day. That's how that works. And this is just basically saying that within the city of New York, there's a city law that says every city agency building has to have a gender neutral bathroom available, right? And DOE school buildings count as city agency buildings. So that city regulation counts for schools. So there should be at least one in the building. Unfortunately, we're not at the place where we can say that every individual school has a gender neutral bathroom because some school buildings have four schools in one building and maybe there isn't the physical structure to accommodate four separate single stall bathrooms, right? But there should be at least one in the building for students. And I'll skip these because I want to see if anybody has any of their own questions before I get to those. So yeah, yeah. And so that's our
All
presentation.
right.
Thank you so much. It was a lot
I
in a
think a
very
great
short period of
audience.
time, but um, we're very thorough. And if you have any questions, we're happy to take them.
This was really terrific. Thank you. And I don't want to monopolize if there are others with questions, but maybe I'll just start off with one. When you mentioned the inclusive curriculum and how this isn't a school by school thing, it's a New York State mandated fact.
Right.
But what the curriculum actually ends up looking like in the classroom in practice, can you talk a little bit about that in terms of the flexibility that individual schools have to make different decisions about what actually enters their classroom and what teachers are teaching?
So honestly, the schools have a lot of flexibility when it comes to the curriculum and what is actually taught, like the lesson plans, right? They're accountable to their district offices. I'm not sure of the actual administrative process of them like having a lesson plan or things approved, but they're accountable to their district offices. But because schools do have that flexibility, a lot of times there are schools that do not integrate LGBTQ identities into their curriculum, right? They maybe they don't want to have the LGBTQ positive or affirming books on display in the library, right? That's an issue that Jude and I are facing on a daily basis, right? And that's one of the things that we come up against a lot in the roles that we are in is making sure that students have equitable access to all literature. But, unfortunately, 1,700 schools, in different neighborhoods, sometimes schools are not being held accountable to what their students have the right to have access to. So that is an issue that we are constantly coming up against, and we're really, really relying on our districts to hold their schools accountable and to make them aware of the policies and the state, federal, all of the things that they need to be aware of as educators within the public school system. So I just wanted to be very transparent with that, is that it's not perfect. And we are very much aware of that, but the reason why our positions are in place is to help that situation get better.
Because we usually get pulled in when there is resistance to perhaps policy that is being followed. And then it's, the resistance, maybe we get parental pushback in that space. So unfortunately, we come in often in the reactive stage, right, of trying to rectify. And we rely on the eyes and ears in the school to tell us if the policy is being upheld. And that's why we rely on our community partners so much to teach this policy on the school level as well. Any other questions? Yeah. Sana?
Becca?
Yes.
Hi, Jude and Kalima. Thank you guys seriously so much. This has been such an inspiring presentation by the DOE, particularly in light of the fact that at our CECD2 meeting last night, our council voted not to vote in a resolution supporting the policies of the DOE and supporting our LGBTQ students. And a number of different objections were raised, and among them were one around disagreement about the policies of the DOE. Some people felt that perhaps the policies went too far. Some felt that they did not go far enough, although I suspect the latter is not really the concern. And so, there is a real disconnect, and it's really useful for us to hear for me sorry, I should introduce myself. I'm a D2 parent and also a member of the CECD2. And you talked a little bit about your focus being on A830 and A832, and kind of somewhat lack of ability for your office to enforce what is actually happening in the schools. So I was just a little bit curious about, you talked a little bit about being reactionary and some of the emails that you're receiving from parents, and particularly if kind of in District 2. I mean, we know what the objections are in District 2, and we know what's happening in District 2 and what's not happening in our District 2 schools. But there is I think for me, there's a question as to sort of the disconnect between the policy and the practice. And I'm interested to know a little bit more about where your office comes into play when there are either, the outcry that I heard last night after our meeting about our District 2 Council's inability to pass this resolution yesterday was really disheartening, to say the least. And so in terms of supporting parents outside of your office and what you guys can do, if you have any recommendations or suggestions for, how parent advocates can really support the work you're doing, I'd love to hear that.
Thank you so much for that question. One recommendation that I have is liaison with the community organizations in your district and your area, right? Because they are often within schools working alongside you and myself to make this school culture better and more strong. So if you form relationships with them yourself as parents, that could be a great way to advocate. I just wanted to lay that out there. So the role of our office. So like you said, it is often reactionary, and it's really up to the district offices to loop us in when there are things happening within the schools in their district. So that could look like a student is being bullied and maybe the school is not reporting it. And you know what I mean? We will come in and hold that school accountable and investigate and figure out what the issue is. But because Jude and I are only a team of two, we're not able to actually directly see all the things that are individually happening in different schools, unfortunately. That's why we try to turnkey a lot of this information to the district leadership. So, and they are responsible to turnkey that information to the schools in their district. That's just kind of how the hierarchy works and like the game of telephone that is within our school system. That's the structure that is in place at this time. So it's imperfect. It's an imperfect system, but I do want to let you know that that is what it is. So it's basically like a school would reach out to their principal if there's an issue, and if the principal is not paying attention or not responsive, then that staff member will reach out to the district, and then the district will, connect with the school and investigate or provide support, whatever the school needs. And maybe the district doesn't feel equipped. Maybe they don't have the knowledge base, or they like, you know what I mean? Or maybe they don't have a staff member in their office that is available to do that. So they'll loop in Jude and myself, and then we would liaise with the district and figure out how we can best support that individual school. But that's how it is. If no one proactively reaches out to us, then we are not aware of that it's happening. A lot of times parents are the ones that reach out to us, directly. It's really important when that happens. You're welcome to do that, but when that happens, it's always important to loop in your district, because a lot of times they have no idea what's happening in the schools in their district. And a lot of times people bypass the district office and reach out to central, and then the district remains clueless. How can they hold their schools accountable if they're not aware, right? So always move in the district office. It's usually the student services manager that is like the first line of contact for a district office. But it might, in another office, it might be the superintendent themselves.
Yeah, one more thing I just want to say quickly, and sort of the substance of what you were talking about, something that really I thought was really well said, and a line that we don't always think about is this difference between bullying and harassment. And you said something about minimizing language, and I feel like that happens a lot in our district by grown-ups, and I can't even imagine what's happening in the individual classrooms. And so I do think that information and kind of knowledge and to let people know that this is not just your average white straight boy bullying white straight boy over something. There are levels of this that are significantly deeper, and it is legally harassment. So just wanted to make that point.
Thank you for that, and that is correct. I see a hand. Am I allowed to call on people? Tam.
Hi, sorry, my phone actually might die. Sorry about that. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Love the work you do. Really, really appreciate you. You're so valuable. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I wanted to ask if you could speak a little bit to the work of GSAs, GSAs in schools, and the importance of GSAs, and the data that shows positive, a correlation between more positive climate for LGBTQ students and staff in schools where there are strong, supported GSAs, but also how you might reach out or include school leaders in a conversation if they don't have a GSA about the benefits of it, about how to start one, and if that work has been active in your office. Thank you.
Jude, do you feel comfortable taking this?
Yeah, so a big part of our work, as we talked about in the beginning of the presentation, is working with GSAs. We have a listserv of over 2,000 GSAs that we work with across the city, from K through 12. There's GSAs, and we really see them as sort of like they're our direct contact in terms of our work that we reach out to consistently. So having that connection is really invaluable. So even from the standpoint of just having direct contacts with us and providing an in to a school, that's really honestly our most consistent line of contact. And, a lot of times they're just teachers. Sometimes we've seen, assistant principals or principals as well, who are involved in the GSAs. I mean, in terms of the data, we know that having a safe, affirming space in school decreases the likelihood of suicide in schools for LGBTQ students because it's that safe space, right? Students spend most of their time at home and at school. And so if they don't feel safe at school, like we talked, that's going to affect their mental health. So we know that GSAs create that space. And we've seen GSAs do it in many ways. Some GSAs create spaces that are just safe spaces where people can come and students feel like it's a social space for them. It's a space of joy. In some schools, it's used as a brave space. So they're doing advocacy work within their schools. We've seen a lot of change happen in schools when GSAs are fighting for their rights to have certain policies, right? They say, oh, I know that we are supposed to be having a gender neutral restroom. That's not happening. And we've seen that actually get rectified and have that gender neutral restroom after the GSAs advocating for themselves. So we know that it has all of these positive effects. And we also work with an organization, Live Out Loud, that helps support GSAs throughout the year. And we also have new GSA advisors reach out to us consistently saying, I would like to start a GSA. How do I do that? Because I think sometimes, it takes one teacher to like really want to do that, but there's a lot of moving pieces. There's funding, which we help with the Identity Club funding. So people can apply if they're not given it to through the school, they can apply for funding through our office. But we understand that it's a lot for one person, to take that on in their school community, and they need support. So part of our role when they reach out to us as a new advisor is making sure that that support's going to happen and where that funding is going to come from and XYZ. So yeah, Kalima, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was also going to mention about the GSA Summit. The GSA Summit is a citywide event that's open to any DOE staff member. They don't have to be the GSA advisor. It can be the school principal that's like, I want to know how to be more supportive, right? They can come. It's held on a PD day, right? Staff get, or professional development day. So staff get professional development credit for attending the GSA Summit if that is their choice, right? Last year we had 1,600 students. This year we had 1,300 students, was a little farther in Brooklyn this year, but it is an opportunity for anyone who works with the young people in the school community to gain more information. We had 50 workshops on, energizing your students to become activists or to help know their rights and things like that. So there are so many opportunities for school staff, district staff to get this information. They just have to be aware of it, right? The main line of contact with a school is via the principal's digest, principal's weekly newsletter called P Digest, right? And so when there's citywide initiatives like the GSA Summit or like the Yankee Stonewall Scholarship, we will put that information in the principal's newsletter, and the principal is responsible to make sure the school community gets that information. A lot of times that doesn't happen, and that's another whole other system. You know what I mean? When maybe the principal's not reading the newsletter or whatever the case. But that is how we connect with the schools, and that's how we uplift schools that don't have GSAs, but they have staff members who want to be proactive about being inclusive.
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing that up. So the GSAs we work with, but of course, all of that principal contact is we're sharing all of those resources consistently as well, and things like the GSA Summit. So we really encourage people to take the opportunities of those PDs.
Thank you so much. I just really quickly, thank you. And I'm on 1%. I know that there's been, we all know there's been a national sort of attack and anti-trans narrative, and that GSAs are being framed as spaces for groomer and pedophile teachers to indoctrinate children. And I've seen an attack on GSAs in District 2, and I'm wondering if you're also seeing some of that pushback that's coming from a parent rights, I guess you want to say, from the parent rights movement.
Yes, we are absolutely seeing.
Okay, thank you.
Everything that's happening in the rest of the world or the rest of the country specifically is directly impacting the work that Jude and I do. It's not like vague or metaphorical. It's like literal, right? When we tragically lost a member of our community, a 16-year-old in Oklahoma, right? Who was non-binary. We have parents who have non-binary kids reaching out to us because they're scared. And they're like, how do I support my kid? What do I do? What do you do to help my school? Like, you know what I mean? So we're getting those calls because they're watching the news and they don't want that to be their child, which is completely valid and understandable. And so it is definitely impacting the work that we do on a daily basis. It's a lot of emotional work for us because we are both part of this community, and it is our community that we care about, right? And we want to be the people that we needed when we were younger. So that's why we do this work. And yeah, we take on that emotional labor because we feel called to do it.
Yeah. And I think we're also getting a lot of, you know, fear from admin that some things that keeping or starting GSAs will create outroar from parent groups. So, you know, be loud in your communities about the need for the GSAs. I just want to say, like, there's a lot of pushback happening, and then I think it creates worry with the administration, and we need those spaces. It's been proven we need those spaces. So, yeah. Any other questions?
I see a question in the chat. Someone's asked, Jessica, you said the slide that mentions how 19.4 of LGBTQ students are taught positive representation and 17% are taught negative content. When is that data from, and are those numbers for NYC specifically? Yes, those numbers are from the Office of School Wellness Programs, which is an office within the Department of Education. And I believe that it's from 2019 or 20, yeah, I believe it's 2019. Yes, so that's when that data is from.
Thank you. Do you see if do you have any sense as to whether that's still tracking similarly now? So
I will check in with the Office of School Wellness Programs and our contacts there and see if that number has drastically changed over time. So thank you for uplifting that. I will definitely double check on it.
Thank you.
Francine?
Hello, good evening, everyone. Francine Cornelius from PS234. I'm a teacher at this lovely school for 27 years. And I think these conversations in schools, they're hard, right? It's hard to have hard conversations. And so I would suggest that, number one, that schools need to learn how to have those hard conversations. One of the ways we've done it at school is through read alouds, and I'm a kindergarten teacher, and I make sure I read a book like Julian is a Mermaid. And I have those books and books like that in my classroom. We as a school make sure that we have books like that in our classrooms. So not every school has gone through their classroom libraries to include a large cultural representation of people in their books, because it's easier to have books about Piggy and Gerald and those cutesy little characters. And it's harder to have books that have different able people or food inequity or more positive Black people or more positive Asian people or more, whatever that is. It's hard to do that. And so, you know, if people want say, how do I start? I would say, look at your classroom libraries and diversify even more than you would think, and use those books and those read alouds to begin those hard conversations.
I love that idea.
I agree with that 100%. Thank you for making your classroom library diverse.
Carol?
Sorry. Okay. Can you hear me now? Is it working? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm Carol Barclay. I'm a grandmother and a mother of PS3, one current student and two alums. So I've been involved with PS3 in the district for a long time. And I also teach at BMCC in early childhood education. So this is all extremely relevant to me. And Francine, I want to thank you so much for that. And I just wanted to add and point out that the existence of books on these topics is relatively new. For those of us who have been working in the field for a very long time, most of our career, there was no such thing as books dealing with diverse characters. So some people need to really shift, and maybe people who are not even that much, old in the field, but just it's a habit that you're not used to seeing them. And so it perpetuates itself. So people really need to be given a push to be reminded that there is now a whole huge, wonderful, and growing library of books on these topics that we can use for children. And so I think if we get the word out that the books exist and spread, maybe we'll get some pushback, but it will also wake up some people, I think, who might go, oh, really? I never saw those books. So I think that's something that we can do in kind of a very concrete way.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Carolyn. I think that is a great way to, start to have these conversations in schools, is just opening up the spectrum of books that are available, right? And not all books have to be about identity. It just has diverse characters. There's a book by Jonathan Van Ness called Peanut Goes for the Gold. It's about a non-binary hamster, right? Like, it's not about the hamster's identity. It's just he's a hamster that does gymnastics. Like, you know what I mean? Like, just to have that available is like it's a game changer for a lot of students who might have never even heard of that. Like, heard of that identity. But it has nothing, it's not going deep into it. It's just the existence of that,
Exactly, which I think is the
you
best.
know?
One of the problems is that the first wave of books raised it as problematic. Oh, here's this child who's different and he's bullied and he has all this problem and he feels so bad. And at the end of the book, he triumphs, he doesn't feel so bad anymore. So I think it's important to get away from that and have people who are all different kinds of diverse identities just existing. And I try
Right.
to do this with my students, and I have to run because in 5 minutes I have to teach a class.
Thank you for being
Thank
here.
you for
Thank you.
sharing that,
Thank you. This was
Yeah.
great. Really appreciate it.
Carol. All right, are there any other questions before we wrap?
Gavin?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for this. I really appreciate this. I'm also a D2 parent and also a CEC member in District 2. And so I'm very glad that you came here and that that Jessica and others have made this space for us to talk. I have a question. Maybe this is also a question for Kelly and for our district. In terms of the what do we have some numbers, or what percentage of schools in our district are in compliance with the sort of the restroom requirements? Because I know that there are a lot of schools in our district that I'm not sure what that number is, so I'm just like curious if Kelly can give us some feedback about what that number is, if not today, but at some point.
Sure. No, thanks very much for that. And hi, Kalima and Jude. I know that I've connected with you over the years about different things. And I appreciate the question. So I'm Kelly McGuire. I'm the District 2 superintendent. And I'm a little embarrassed to say that I don't know for sure right now. What I can say is that before the pandemic, we were 100% in compliance. And actually, it was our middle school leadership committee that was facilitated, representatives from all of our middle schools, student representatives from all of our middle schools, working together with the superintendent and a principal, who really came forward with this issue as a district-wide issue. And they worked closely with Gail Brewer, who was the borough president at the time, and not only ensured that there was a GSA in all of our middle and high schools, but also that there was a gender-neutral bathroom, a single-stall gender-neutral bathroom in all schools. And at that time, I can say that we were 100%. It is something that we should check on because I don't, a lot of things got thrown in the air during the pandemic, and we should confirm that both of those things are still in existence in our schools, because it was, I think actually it even went through before the city council and was like passed by city council. Not to say that, that trumped the state vote and regulations on this, but it was a very affirming experience, both for the students and for the district as a whole. So I will get back to you on that, just to confirm. And Sarah Maiolo, she works with our middle school leadership conference now. She's one of our student services managers. And it's something that we can work together to confirm.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, I guess I'll pass it back to you, Jessica, if there's no more questions, or Sana.
I just have a very quick one. I'm sorry, guys. So, and I don't know who's who on because we're on Zoom, but there's a meme on my screen that reads, "Why is talking sexually in the workplace considered sexual harassment to adults, but talking about sexuality to children at school is considered essential?" And, you know, many of us have seen this in other contexts, and I would love to get your thoughts on that, and kind of from what you read about what the curriculum is and what the intent is of the DOE and its policies. There's a lot of, in my opinion, misinformation and fear mongering, and it's led by certain groups and certain, movements, shall we call them, at this point in our history. So I'd love to just kind of, get you guys to speak on that for like a minute or two.
And can you read the quote again, the question?
Why is talking sexual? This is one that's all over the internet. Why is talking sexually in the workplace considered sexual harassment to adults, but talking about sexuality to children at schools is considered essential?
Okay. So yes, yeah, I hear that a lot. And yes, it's not the same. We're talking about apples and oranges. Obviously, talking sexually and talking about sexual orientation are two completely different things. And one of the misconceptions about LGBTQ inclusive curriculum is that it's based on sex and sexual activity. You can talk about identity without even mentioning what two people do on their own time. Like, you know what I mean? Or what you can talk about identity without talking about sex, without talking about intimacy at all. You know what I mean? It's about a person's identity, how they feel in their head, in their heart, everywhere we have our sense of who we are as people. That is what identity is. And so that's the misconception that a lot of people have and what they use to oppose inclusive curriculum. But it's talking about apples and oranges, and they're not even it's not even talking about apples and oranges. It's talking about apples and screwdrivers. Like they're not even in the same category, in my opinion. Jude, if you would like to speak to that.
Yeah, well, just thinking about what we were talking about, inclusive curriculum, and I was giving those examples, right? Like Colin was openly gay. That's an identity, right? That's how we move through the world. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about sexuality, right? And then we talked about it again when we were reading the book taught by Todd Parr, the family book. Some people have two moms and two dads. That's what we're talking about. So this whole idea that it's that it's based in sex is completely false. And I think using to derail our whole, like, what inclusive curriculum and inclusivity and diversity is about, and a respect for all initiatives. So it's very, yeah, it's apples and screwdrivers. And I think it's just people need to understand what LGBTQ inclusion really looks like.
Thank you.
Well, this was absolutely fantastic. Thank you both so much for your time, for sharing all of this fantastic information. If anybody has any additional follow-up questions or any other topics in general, please feel free to reach out to me. I believe this was recorded, and I imagine there's a way for us to get a copy of the slides if we'd like.
Yeah, we'll send that to you.
Terrific. Thank you. This is really just important, I think now more than ever, and greatly appreciate the work you're doing.
And thank you all. Thank you all for being proactive parents who want to advocate for your kids. Thank you all, because it's not always a given. So we appreciate it.
Appreciate
Thanks
it.
again, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you all.